What would make a family abandon everything in the dead of night? I'm not talking about packing bags and leaving a note. I'm talking about vanishing, leaving behind warm coffee on the table, clothes in the closet, and the car keys on the counter. In January 2016, this is exactly what happened to the Kramer family. When police entered their home, everything was untouched, as if they had just stepped out for a moment. The TV was still playing softly, and a cell phone on the nightstand wouldn't stop ringing. The officer who picked it up was stunned. The call was coming from inside the house, from the landline, a landline that had been disconnected for weeks. The Kramer house sat on the quiet edge of a small Montana town. It was an ordinary two-story building, the kind with white walls and a porch that would be lined with sunflowers in the summer. The family, Michael, his wife Sarah, and their young daughter Lily had moved there in 2009. He was a history teacher, and she was a librarian. Their life was the picture of suburban tranquility, so predictable and calm that it would never normally make the news. But that was before the strangeness began. In the months leading up to their disappearance, neighbors started noticing things. It began with the lights. Every single night, at precisely 2:13 a.m., the lights in the house would flicker on and then off again. Then came the phone calls. Sarah confided in a friend that when she was home alone, she would sometimes answer the phone and hear her own voice. It was a perfect echo, repeating the last words she had spoken, but with a strange, unnerving delay. At first, they dismissed it as a technical glitch, a crossed wire somewhere in the old system. Michael, methodical and rational, began to document the times of every call. He soon discovered a bizarre pattern. The calls only happened during strong winds. He even made a joke about it once, saying, "It's like the house is trying to talk to us through the wires." That joke stopped being funny on January 14th. By the next morning, the Kramers were gone. It was their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Holt, who raised the alarm. On the night of January 15th, she noticed the Kramers' lights were burning brightly long into the night, which was unusual for the early-to-bed family. By morning, the house was dark, but their car was still parked in the driveway. She tried calling and knocking, but there was no answer. After 2 full days with no sign of the family, she called the police. When officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked, but there were no signs of a break-in. The scene inside was deeply unsettling. It was as if time had frozen in the middle of a quiet family morning. 3 cups of coffee sat on the kitchen table, still warm to the touch. A newspaper was laid open to the weather page, forecasting snow. On the dining room table, Lily's school notebook lay open, with the words "History Project" neatly written across the top of a blank page. In the living room, an old black-and-white movie from the 1960s was still playing on the television, its tinny soundtrack, the only sound in the silent house. Then, an officer noticed a vibration. On the bedside table in the master bedroom, Sarah's cell phone was ringing. The screen glowed with a single impossible word. "Home." The officer hesitantly answered the call. All he heard at first was slow, steady breathing on the other end of the line. Then, a faint whisper broke the silence. It was a woman's voice, identical to Sarah Kramer's. The voice said just 4 words, "We're already home," and then the line went dead. Later, phone company records were pulled. They confirmed that the Kramers' landline had been officially disconnected 3 weeks prior. There was no power, no active circuit. Yet, the outgoing call logs from Sarah's cell phone were undeniable. They showed multiple call attempts, all originating from that dead house phone. The investigation was extensive. Police, forensics teams, and volunteers scoured every inch of the property, the attic, the crawl space, the basement, the yard. They found no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a forced entry or an abduction. Nothing was missing, not wallets, not jewelry, not even family heirlooms. It was as if the Kramers had simply evaporated. But down in the dusty, cobweb-filled basement, they found something peculiar. Tucked away in a corner was an old rotary phone, the kind with a heavy black receiver and a circular dial. It was unplugged, its cord frayed, and covered in a thick layer of dust. It clearly hadn't been used since the house was renovated years before. A technician, out of sheer curiosity, lifted the receiver. There was no dial tone, of course, but there was a sound, a faint, rhythmic static hum, like the sound of someone breathing quietly and slowly through the line. The telecommunication experts brought in were baffled. They couldn't explain how a disconnected, analog phone could generate any signal at all. Their confusion only deepened when they examined the house's electrical records from the night the Kramers vanished. The system had recorded a series of short, rhythmic power surges. The timestamps of these surges matched the exact moments the mysterious calls were logged. It was as if something had briefly and deliberately reactivated the old, forgotten circuit, just long enough to make a call. The final piece of this chilling puzzle came from a traffic camera positioned across the street. Reviewing the footage from that night, investigators saw something that made their blood run cold. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the precise moment the first call was made to Sarah's phone, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the upstairs window of the Kramer house. And then, in an instant, the house went completely dark. A month passed. The case went cold, relegated to a file of unexplained disappearances. Then, the landlord who owned the property found an envelope taped to her front door. There was no stamp, no return address. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was old and faded, but the image was unmistakable. It showed the Kramer house, taken from the outside. But in the second-floor window, where the flash of light had appeared, 3 shadowy silhouettes stood side by side. And based on the reflection in the glass, the angle, the perspective, the photo had been taken from inside the house. The Kramer house still stands today, a silent monument on the edge of that Montana town. It's been sold several times over the years, but no one ever stays for long. Tenants report strange occurrences, the most common being phantom phone calls. They come from disconnected numbers, and sometimes the voices on the other end sound disturbingly familiar. The local folklore has its own theory. They say if you dial the old Kramer family number at exactly 2:13 in the morning, you might not get a deadline. You might hear a child's faint laughter, or the soft, distant clinking of ceramic cups, as if someone has just poured coffee for 3. The police officially closed the case years ago, labeling it unsolved. But tucked away in an archived copy of the final report, a curious technician added a short, handwritten note. It reads, "Line remains active. Weak signal detected once a month. Origin, inside the house, even when vacant." Thank you so much for joining me on this unsettling journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. See you next time.